The studio illumination burns intensely, glancing off sleek microphones and anxious countenances, while cameras slowly traverse a curved arrangement of seating, the type of configuration designed for major discussion panels where every utterance is calculated and every quiet moment exaggerated. Morgan Freeman inclines anteriorly, his vocal delivery polished yet underpinned by an unforeseen quality: patronization. "You understand?" he commences, his inflection composed yet piercing, that certain individuals confuse audibility with authority, just as fervor does not invariably amount to astuteness. The gathered observers chuckle, a noise that begins softly but expands rapidly like an untamed flame, civil amusement surrendering to knowing expressions of derision. Positioned opposite him, Representative Jasmine Crockett remains entirely static, displaying no guarded readjustment, no discernible wince, just profound, quiet tranquility. The lens focuses upon her eyes, which are unwavering, inscrutable, and actively energized with self-control. Freeman proceeds, the cinematic icon dominating the environment without exertion, seemingly oblivious to the precarious boundary he navigates. It is commendable, certainly, this energy, he appends with a subtle smirk. Yet occasionally the most astute maneuver is recognizing the moment to cease verbalizing. A soft ripple of sound moves through the spectators, and the camera holds its focus on Jasmine, whose lips separate negligibly, a minuscule smile appearing that indicates not entertainment but comprehension. She realizes precisely what just transpired. The chamber believes this is his juncture, and he believes it is his triumphal procession. Yet stillness becomes her armament. Seconds elapse, burdensome and charged, while the amusement dissolves one respiration at a time, superseded by a vibration of expectancy. Everybody awaits her response, her counter-argument, or her fury, yet none arrives. Instead, Jasmine straightens her posture slightly, her gaze fastened upon Freeman. When she ultimately articulates her thoughts, her vocalization is calculated, quiet enough to pull auditors closer, yet acute enough to slice through the strain. "Mr. Freeman," she states, "you've played wise men all your life. I understand why you'd expect everyone else to speak like your scripts." The atmosphere transforms, the amusement terminates, and her inflection remains tranquil, yet her stare is steadfast, an expression that notifies everyone she is not performing. She is experiencing it. Freeman blinks momentarily, caught unaware, and nobody stirs. The quietude feels perpetual, and subsequently she inclines anteriorly merely fractionally, the slightest grin reappearing, since the instant she uttered words, the amusement ceased. Even Morgan Freeman failed to anticipate its arrival. Morgan Freeman is not merely another discussion participant. He is an establishment, an articulation of solemnity, a living symbol of sagacity. Entire cohorts have matured listening to his commentary frame historical events, salvation, and humankind itself. When he vocalizes, individuals attend, and when he offers criticism, they indicate agreement. His statements possess the gravity of expertise, and his composed presentation frequently feels like absolute truth, which is what renders his verbal strike at Jasmine Crockett so formidable. It is not merely a solitary slight, it is cultural dominance questioning nascent reality. For the spectators viewing, this is not simply regarding a difference of opinion, it is representative. A towering cinematic figure, sophisticated, calculated, and revered, is seated opposite a youthful congresswoman who has established her reputation by being unapologetically outspoken. One symbolizes establishment status, the other the articulation of a burgeoning America, varied, straightforward, and unrefined. Jasmine Crockett's appellation did not ascend quietly. From impassioned legislative addresses to widely circulated videos of her championing fairness and impartiality, she has become a focal point. Supporters perceive ingenuity, zeal, and fortitude, while detractors label her clamorous, pugnacious, and excessively audacious for statecraft. Every occasion she communicates, she treads the boundary between substantiation and demonization, which is the precarious path so many females, particularly females of color, are compelled to travel. Therefore, when Freeman's statement conveys that understated implication about recognizing the moment to cease verbalizing, the instant metamorphoses, it becomes greater than the chamber, greater than him or her. It concerns who is permitted to define astuteness, who is considered poised, and who is branded emotional. For Jasmine, it is not regarding self-importance, it is regarding depiction. Millions viewing perceive themselves in her quietude, the scholars, the careerists, the visionaries, all who have been instructed to await their turn, to moderate their inflection, to render their communication acceptable. Her immobility is not indecision, it is computation. She is assessing not merely her vocabulary, but the inheritance of it. Morgan Freeman symbolizes the existence that credits wisdom as sounding recognizable, profound, consistent, male, and matured in experience. Jasmine personifies the reality that asserts wisdom also originates from those ascending, from those struggling, from those never offered the microphone but grasping it regardless. The strain between them vibrates like interference, a generational, societal, and philosophical impasse where each term she selects could resonate far beyond that studio. For the executives located behind the partition, the quiet feels perilous. It is ratings treasure, affirmative, yet volatile. For the observers, it is alluring. One can nearly perceive the communal breath being suspended across domestic spaces and mobile devices everywhere. This is not merely a discussion program, it is a juncture of judgment masquerading as amusement. Jasmine's poise is not opposition, it is lucidity. She comprehends that replying to hubris with ire only nourishes the storyline, whereas encountering it with intellect and elegance dismantles it from within. Every strand of her essence has been molded for occasions such as this: the tribunal, the legislative chamber, and now the camera's unyielding gaze. Freeman believes he is administering a tutorial, but what he fails to grasp is that he has become the topic of one, because when a myth attempts to determine your value, you either diminish or you recharacterize the myth himself. Morgan Freeman has constructed a domain of veneration, a vocation hewn from tranquil assurance and cinematic veracity. His vocals have narrated everything from the chronicle of the divine to the chronicle of the nation. When he articulates, his rhythm possesses gravity, unhurried, intentional, with every interval saturated in muted command. Yet somewhere within that tranquility resides a shade. For decades, audiences have lauded Freeman's charisma, that mild wit, that effortless grin. However, in numerous interviews concealed behind the polished delivery exists a routine. The understated touch of patronization, a specific inflection kept for the youthful, the inexperienced, or the unapologetically vocal. It is the variety of tone that does not vociferate over you. It rejects you gently, like a guardian indulging an infant. Video segments travel online, fragments of Freeman reclining in interviews, eyes partially shut, smirking as a junior guest attempts to dispute him. He interrupts, not with aggression, but with a chortle. He dismisses opposing viewpoints with expressions like, "You'll understand when you've lived a little," or "Wisdom takes time." The observers laugh on every occasion, as if the recorded laughter itself has been conditioned to comply with him. And yet somewhere profoundly within those instances, an unease remains. That laughter does not invariably sound like entertainment. Sometimes it sounds like acquiescence, like individuals laughing because quietude would be too expository. In one compilation, you would observe it distinctively. Freeman on a podcast gently amending a journalist mid-statement, the crowd giggling politely. Freeman at a cinema panel designating a young activist too zealous for her own benefit. Freeman on a red carpet Q&A where he brushes aside a female host's grave inquiry with a smirk, saying, "Now don't overthink it, sweetheart." The observers laugh again, always the identical cadence: wit, supremacy, acclamation. Digital media narrates a different account, clips analyzed, subtitles appended, vocals ascending in disputation. Some protect him fiercely, claiming he is traditional, He has merited it, while others designate it accurately. Moderated hubris attired in charisma. Hashtags appear: respect versus dismissal, the Freeman consequence. The fable of the unreachable elder statesman begins to fracture under examination. Inside the broadcast facility, the audience's response reflects that schism. Some incline forward, smirking in high regard, prepared to align with the icon, while others restlessly shift, perceiving something amiss, that slight atmosphere of haughtiness masquerading as instruction. The laughter feels forced presently, the ease vanishing. This is not the Freeman of cinema, the saving character, the ethical guide. This is the Freeman of influence, the individual whose intellect has become weaponry. He is the one who has recognized that mastery is not regarding amplitude, it is regarding inflection. He does not require raising his voice to conquer a room, he simply lowers it until you are compelled to lean closer. That is what renders his interaction with Jasmine so thrilling, because for the initial time, the equation malfunctions. The charisma does not succeed, the authority does not subjugate, and the sagacity sounds prepared. Opposite him is seated a woman who has witnessed enough of that inflection to identify it immediately, not as guidance, but as a facade. Freeman's shadow looms expansively, not malicious but symbolic. He is the incarnation of an establishment that obscures exclusion behind articulacy. His utterances are never vulgar, but their exactitude slices just as profoundly. Knowing the moment to cease speaking, he informed her previously, the words attired as counsel yet acute enough to injure. That is the muted brilliance of intellectual supremacy. It persuades the world of its benevolence. It conceals rejection in refinement. It gains approval for eroding you elegantly, and for decades nobody ventured to challenge it. Until presently, because what Jasmine signifies is more than merely youth or audacity, she signifies the realization, the generation that no longer defers to civil inhibition, the type that hears the undertone and declares, "No, I caught that." And in that studio, encompassed by laughter and illumination, the shadow of Morgan Freeman's assurance begins to quiver. His calmness, once disarming, now feels protective. His humor, once charismatic, now sounds tactical. The spectators begin to perceive it too, the juncture where high regard becomes realization. For a man who occupied a lifetime being the articulation of veracity, the most difficult sound to confront is quietude that does not concur. He assumed this would be another effortless interaction until Jasmine reversed the scenario. Long before the cameras, before the popular hashtags and broadcast debates, Jasmine Crockett's voice was hardened in the furnace of actual adversity. Not the cinematic variety, but the variety that examines your identity when nobody is observing. Her narrative does not commence in the polished corridors of Congress. It originates in a diminutive Texas tribunal, fluorescent illumination buzzing overhead, the atmosphere burdensome with exhaustion and quiet rebellion. She was not a celebrated figure then, merely a public defender with a pile of case dossiers taller than her compensation, standing up for individuals the apparatus had already neglected. Those courtrooms were her combat zones, her lecture halls, her testing grounds. She would enter, frequently encountering magistrates who would glance past her qualifications and undervalue her before she even articulated a word. Opposing counsel twice her age, with twice her associations, smirked civilly until she dismantled their contentions segment by segment. The initial occasion she heard someone murmur, "Too emotional for law," she did not dispute, she simply won the lawsuit. There were evenings she would remain in her office long after the custodial staff had departed for home, case files strewn about, a solitary lamp illuminating her annotations. She was not pursuing acclamation, she was pursuing equanimity, the type that does not arrive easily, particularly for a Black woman in the judicial system, the type that necessitates more than ingenuity. It necessitates tenacity, poise, and the fortitude to enter spaces that were never engineered to welcome you. Her ascent was not rapid. It was merited millimeter by millimeter through protracted hearings, antagonistic cross-examinations, and the quiet triumphs nobody bothered to document. Regional activists began to observe, as did the individuals whose existences she altered. Single mothers incorrectly accused, adolescents, veterans misplaced in administration. They started appearing at her rallies when she campaigned for office, not because she pledged miracles, but because she listened. Then arrived the media, the examination, the categorizations, spirited, hostile, unrefined, the terminology that has long been cipher for excessively unapologetic. If you let the world define your story, it will write you out of it. Consequently, she recharacterized it. She transformed every assault into a contention for genuineness, every misrepresentation into an occasion of lucidity. When journalists inquired if she worried about being too audacious for Congress, she smirked and stated, "Justice doesn't come to those who whisper." Her journey to Capitol Hill was anything but untroubled. She encountered adversaries who questioned her intellect, contributors who doubted her feasibility, and commentators who could not determine whether to disregard her or fear her. Yet she continued appearing at every community function, every policy deliberation, every municipal gathering. She appeared with bearing, with poise, and with that identical calm intensity that once won her courtroom struggles. Her fortitude was not in amplitude, it was in speed. She articulated truths that traveled further than indignation, words that sliced through commotion because they were grounded in clarity, not turbulence. In Congress, her vocals grew sharper, more intentional. She became a champion not just of legislation, but of doctrine. When others evaded controversy, she confronted it directly. She discussed racial inequalities, voter inhibition, gender prejudice, topics that rendered people uneasy, but necessary discomfort has always been her indigenous language. On interns. Constituents remember her on interns. Constituents remember her late-night telephone calls after municipal meetings, ensuring a single mother had entry to housing aid or a veteran obtained the medical records he required. She believed statecraft was not presentation, it was duty, and duty was not a catchphrase, it was forfeiture. Her internal ideology was uncomplicated but immovable. Don't fight to be heard, speak so truth echoes by itself. It is why she never vociferates in interviews, why she does not correspond aggression with aggression. She knows calmness disconcerts hubris, that silence, when intentional, possesses the mass of thunder. Her composure became her shield, her lucidity, her armament. While others maneuvered around surveys and appearances, Jasmine moved with ethical gravity. You could perceive it in her presence, not the magnetism of celebrity, but the certitude of someone who has had to validate herself every solitary day. By the time she stepped into that studio with Morgan Freeman, she was not walking into a trap. She was walking into a juncture she had been preparing for her entire existence. The distinction between the courtroom and the camera was not apprehension, it was revelation. This time, the audience was not 12 jurors. It was millions viewing to ascertain if calm truth could still triumph in an era dependent on spectacle, and she knew exactly what was at risk. Because this was not regarding her vanity, it was regarding representation for every woman told to lower her tone, for every voice that had been laughed off the stage of public discourse. She was not merely defending herself, she was defending the concept that intellect and integrity do not need to shout to be potent. So when Freeman mocked her on air, when the amusement rippled and the room inclined to see if she would collapse, she did not wince. She smiled. Morgan Freeman inclines forward, voice resonant and intentional, the kind of tone that has narrated documentaries defining dignity and commanded rooms for decades. He is not elevating his voice. He does not have to. His calm is weaponized charm, his criticism disguised as solicitude. "I just think," he begins, eyes glinting beneath studio lights, "that sometimes people mistake passion for wisdom. You can shout about justice all day long, but shouting doesn't build understanding." The audience chuckles softly, uncertain whether to applaud or remain cautious. It sounds plausible. How could it not when spoken in that legendary voice, the kind of voice that has solaced millions, now subtly questioning the intelligence of the woman sitting opposite him? Jasmine does not blink. She tilts her head slightly as if examining not the affront but the intention behind it. Freeman continues, sensing approval in the atmosphere. I respect what you're trying to do, he adds, his smile patient, condescending in its civility. But the real problem is everyone wants to play hero these days. Politics, activism, Hollywood. Everyone thinks their opinion is gospel. Laughter again. But it is nervous now, because even as he speaks, Jasmine's silence stretches longer than comfort allows. The camera pans her eyes steady, her respiration even. She waits until the laughter fades, until every murmur in the studio dissolves into quiet curiosity. Then she inclines forward just slightly, voice calm but electric. Morgan, she says softly, can I ask you something? He smiles, amused. Of course. Her tone remains steady, neither defensive nor deferential. You've spent your life telling stories about justice, about truth, about humanity, but when was the last time you listened to someone who didn't already have a stage? The inquiry lands like a tremor. He hesitates, searching for the rhythm that once made every word he spoke sound like scripture, but the room has changed. The laughter has evaporated, the smiles have frozen. Jasmine continues, her words deliberate, each one measured like a scalpel, because it's easy to talk about humanity when the world already calls you wise. It's harder when you have to prove your humanity just to be heard. The panel shifts uncomfortably. One of the hosts glances toward the control booth, and even the crew seems to realize the tone of the conversation has changed. Freeman tries to recover, his chuckle thin now. I'm just saying. But Jasmine does not let him. Not by interruption, but by presence. Her gaze holds him in place, and she speaks again, softer this time. I understand what you're saying about passion, but passion built this country. It's what made people march, organize, vote, speak, even when they were told to be quiet. Passion, she pauses, eyes narrowing just slightly, isn't noise. It's courage. He exhales through his nose, leaning back, crossing his arms, a sign of retreat more than composure. The audience senses it, the shift, the reversal. For the first time, Morgan Freeman looks like a man reaching for control he does not have. She presses gently, never elevating her voice. You said everyone wants to play hero, she says, but some of us don't have that luxury. Some of us are just trying to make sure the truth doesn't get buried under the comfort of old voices. The silence that follows is absolute. It is the kind of silence that television producers fear, the kind that cannot be cut with background music or a quick edit because it is real, because it is heavy, because it means something has landed. Freeman clears his throat, trying to recompose his authority. Well, that's an interesting point, he says, the usual resonance of his voice thinner now, the edge of uncertainty creeping in. But Jasmine does not respond. She does not need to. The power has already shifted. The host tries to interject, sensing the awkwardness. Let's move to our next topic. But no one moves. Not yet. Every eye is still on Jasmine, whose calm composure radiates more power than any monologue could. She does not gloat, does not smirk. She simply folds her hands, the faintest hint of empathy softening her expression. Not victory, but truth acknowledged. And in that moment, it is clear the debate is not about who spoke louder, it is about who spoke with more conviction. Then with one perfectly measured line, she left him speechless. The pause lingers, a living thing between them. Morgan Freeman's eyes, once so assured, now narrow slightly as if searching for footing on ground that no longer feels solid. The cameras catch it. The audience feels it. The moment breathes with quiet electricity. Jasmine Crockett does not rush. She is deliberate, her voice calm yet cutting with precision. You know, she begins, it's interesting how quickly passion gets called anger when it comes from people like me. The words float through the room, poised, controlled, but undeniably heavy. Freeman leans back slightly, his hands clasped, eyes flickering with surprise. I've heard that my tone is too sharp, Jasmine continues, that I should be more measured, more graceful, but I wonder who decided what grace looks like. Who benefits when my tone makes people comfortable instead of my truth making them think? No elevated voice, no sarcasm, just logic and lived reality delivered like a scalpel to ego. Freeman shifts in his seat, lips parting as if to respond, but something in her delivery holds him still. The audience senses it too. This is not confrontation, it is correction, a masterclass in restraint. She presses on. You said earlier that shouting doesn't build understanding, but Mr. Freeman, understanding doesn't build itself. It takes people willing to be loud enough to make you look even when you'd rather not. Her gaze does not waver. It is not rebellion in her eyes. It is grace, sharpened by exhaustion. The truth is, she continues, I've spent years listening to men with microphones explain how the world works. But when Black women speak from experience, it's called emotion instead of insight. We don't get to be the narrators of our own stories. We get narrated. Gasps ripple from the live audience, and one host swallows audibly. The control room camera quietly zooms closer on Freeman's face, his jaw tight, eyes cast downward for a split second. Jasmine does not look at him. She speaks to the air, to everyone watching. And maybe it's not personal, Mr. Freeman, maybe it's systemic. Maybe what you call wisdom has been built on the idea that experience only counts when it comes from a man who already has the world's respect. Freeman exhales slow, contemplative, the sound of a man realizing the argument is not about him, but everything he represents. The audience stays silent. Even the hum of the lights seems quieter now. Then Jasmine leans in slightly, the tone softening, humanizing. I grew up hearing your voice tell stories about freedom, struggle, hope. I admired that you taught generations to see light in the darkness. But what I've learned standing where I stand now is that light doesn't just come from narrators. It comes from those willing to speak even when their voice trembles. Her words disarm, not attack. There is no venom, only clarity. It is the kind of truth that does not need volume, only presence. Freeman's gaze lifts for the first time. There is no pretense of dominance. His expression softens, a quiet humility in the corners of his eyes. Jasmine continues her rhythm steady. You asked me earlier what shouting accomplishes. It accomplishes survival because silence for people like me has never been safety. It's been erasure, and every time I speak, I'm reminding someone watching that their truth deserves to be heard too. Applause begins hesitant at first, then growing, but she does not pause for it. Her focus stays on him. And I don't need everyone to agree with me, she says, but I do need people to understand that comfort has never been the measure of progress. Discomfort is what pushes nations forward, what reshapes old ideas, what forces us to evolve. She glances briefly toward the crowd. So if my voice shakes a few tables, maybe those tables needed shaking. The line lands like thunder wrapped in silk. Freeman's eyes close for half a beat, and he nods once, slow, deliberate. That's fair, he murmurs, but his voice cracks slightly, the steady confidence replaced with reflection. The moderator tries to steer the show back on track, but no one moves. No one wants to cut away from what is unfolding. Jasmine offers a faint smile, not smug, but peaceful. I don't say this to challenge you, she adds, her voice quieter now. I say it because I respect what you've built, but respect shouldn't mean silence. It should mean honesty, even when honesty stings. That is when it happens. The shift. Freeman's eyes glisten slightly under the lights. The man who has narrated centuries of struggle on screen now sits in quiet contemplation, face softening as if hearing something new, something that reaches him not as an actor, but as a human being. He nods again, slower this time. You're right, he admits, voice subdued. Maybe I've gotten too used to hearing my own voice. The audience exhales collectively, the tension breaking into quiet awe. Some clap softly, others just watch, stunned by the intimacy of the exchange. Jasmine smiles gently, meeting his gaze. We all have, she says. That's why we need more voices, not fewer. It is the perfect closure, calm, complete, transcendent. But even as the moment ends, the atmosphere lingers. The cameras capture Freeman lowering his head slightly, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement, the kind that does not need words. Social media will later dissect every second. the tilt of his head, the calm in her tone, the moment a cultural icon became the student. Clips will loop endlessly across timelines. The moment Jasmine Crockett silenced Morgan Freeman without raising her voice. Comment sections will explode. She didn't just win the debate, she changed the conversation. This is how you teach without tearing down. Dignity has never looked this powerful. The viral flood begins even before the show ends on X, on TikTok, on every platform. Her quote circulates like gospel. Passion isn't noise, it's courage. And beneath that, millions of views, millions of echoes. Freeman later in a backstage interview will simply say, "That woman reminded me what grace sounds like." Because that's what Jasmine Crockett had done, taken mockery and turned it into a masterclass, a dissection of ego that never spilled into insult. She had built her victory not by tearing down a man's legacy, but by elevating the truth he'd forgotten to see. In that moment, the audience didn't just witness a debate, they witnessed transformation, a moment of pure, poised defiance that silenced arrogance with empathy. And when the lights dimmed, it was clear dignity had won the night, but the aftermath of that moment would turn a televised exchange into a cultural reckoning. It started within minutes of the broadcast-ending clips of Jasmine Crockett's poised takedown flooded every corner of the internet. On X, the hashtag Dr. Crockett silences Freeman shot to #1 worldwide, followed by hashtag respect over fame and hashtag truth wins. Every platform pulsed with the same electric current, disbelief, admiration, and a collective sense that something bigger than television had just happened. The first wave came from social media commentators' short viral posts with millions of views. She didn't just respond, one tweet read, she rewrote the dynamic. Another post simply said, "Grace is the new power," accompanied by a still image of Jasmine mid-sentence, calm and radiant. The frame would become an instant meme, replicated, remixed, and reshared with captions like, "This is what composure looks like," and "Silence them with truth." Within hours, major outlets joined in. CNN's late-night recap called it the moment calm intellect dismantled cultural authority. MSNBC labeled it a generational exchange that defined a new era of discourse. Even conservative talk shows, unable to ignore the clip's momentum, framed it as a wake-up call about humility in the public eye. Then came the late-night hosts, each spinning the exchange into something cultural, not just political. On one show, a split-screen replay contrasted Freeman's mockery with Jasmine's stillness. The audience roared at the contrast, not because it was funny, but because it was true. It wasn't comedy anymore, it was commentary. Political podcasts dove deeper, analysts, sociologists, and digital creators dissected every word, tone, and gesture. One viral thread compared the moment to historical turning points in media power when the public stopped worshiping icons and started questioning them. "This isn't about disrespect," one podcaster said. "It's about evolution. It's about a generation that values authenticity over legacy, truth over tone." The sentiment spread especially among young activists, women, and marginalized communities. They saw Jasmine not just as a politician, but as proof that intellect and dignity could shatter even the oldest hierarchies. The comment sections became digital town squares filled with pride and unity. "She didn't yell," one viewer wrote. "She didn't perform, she just existed in her truth, and it was enough." Across timelines, people began reflecting on their own experiences, being underestimated, talked over, dismissed. Jasmine's calm dismantling of Freeman's authority became a mirror for millions who'd felt silenced in classrooms, workplaces, and debates. TikTok edits surfaced with cinematic soundtracks, her quote, "Passion isn't noise, it's courage," layered over slow-motion replays, fading into applause and text overlays like "history shifts." Quietly, news anchors called it a lesson in the art of response. Influencers called it the modern definition of leadership. But not everyone was celebrating. In certain corners of the establishment, the moment stirred discomfort. Editorials surfaced questioning whether she had been too assertive or too philosophical for a political figure. Yet even those critiques fell flat. Every attempt to reframe her grace as aggression only amplified her authenticity. And Freeman's response, silence at first, then days later a statement through his publicist. Humble, reflective, Congresswoman Crockett spoke truth with honor, it read. We should all learn from that. It was short but sincere, and just like that the story shifted again from conflict to reflection, from ego to understanding. By the week's end, the moment had transcended debate shows and entered classroom sermons and leadership seminars. Professors referenced it in communication courses. Motivational speakers replayed her clip at conferences. Even school teachers used it to teach the power of composure under pressure. It was no longer just a viral clip. It had become cultural currency, memes turned into messages, posts turned into movements. And through it all, Jasmine stayed silent. No follow-up interviews, no self-congratulations, just a simple message posted to her social account. Respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated. That single line gathered millions of likes, cementing her position not just as a political figure, but as a symbol of grace under fire. Commentators began comparing it to generational shifts, the passing of symbolic power. Freeman represented the old world of authority rooted in celebrity and reverence. Jasmine represented the new leadership rooted in conviction, intellect, and presence. The exchange was no longer about one interview, it had become a metaphor for the cultural crossroads of 2025. People weren't just watching a debate, they were witnessing transformation, a new era of discourse where moral clarity, outshone pedigree, and poise became the sharpest weapon of all. And as clips continued circulating, one comment kept resurfacing, written and rewritten thousands of times. She didn't destroy him, she awakened him. The irony was poetic. The actor who once narrated freedom had just been reminded of it live on air by a woman who embodied it. By week's end, hashtags had become headlines, and headlines had become history. The clip didn't fade, it evolved, replayed endlessly as both cautionary tale and source of empowerment. And through the noise, one truth began to echo louder than all the rest, a truth too profound to be unseen. But beyond the headlines, a deeper truth began echoing, one that couldn't be unseen when the noise finally settled. The hashtags dimmed. The comment sections cooled, and the replay counters stopped ticking. What lingered wasn't the clash. It was the quiet in that stillness. The world seemed to finally grasp what had happened. Freeman's silence after Jasmine's words wasn't defeat, it was realization. It was the sound of intellect, meeting integrity of performance, meeting principle, and recognizing which one endures. That silence became symbolic. It spread beyond the broadcast, beyond the debate. It stood as a mirror to a culture obsessed with volume, proving that not all strength shouts, some simply stand still. Jasmine Crockett's composure became a lesson in modern leadership. She didn't interrupt, retaliate, or grandstand. She listened, she waited. Then she spoke with precision, every syllable anchored in empathy, not ego. In an age of outrage, her calm felt radical. Commentators began calling it the Crockett Doctrine, the art of answering arrogance with authenticity. But Jasmine didn't craft doctrine, she embodied it. Her grace wasn't a performance, it was a practice, and that authenticity exposed a truth America desperately needed to remember: dignity still moves people. Because the moment wasn't really about a debate or a generational divide, it was about the moral architecture of discourse itself, what it means to lead, to listen, to speak truth without tearing down. It reminded millions that real leadership doesn't demand the spotlight, it earns it through composure. Freeman's reaction, the faint smile, the lowered eyes, the quiet acknowledgement became an unexpected symbol too. The man who'd built a career on wisdom found himself confronted by it. His silence wasn't weakness, it was respect. It was what happens when confidence yields to clarity. And perhaps that was the hidden beauty of the exchange, that both figures in their own way revealed something human. Jasmine showed that courage can exist without aggression. Freeman showed that humility can follow pride. Together, they created a rare, fleeting moment of equilibrium where truth didn't have to shout to be heard across America. Reflections poured in, educators spoke of it as a teachable moment. Activists called it a case study in poise. Even corporate leaders cited it in discussions about emotional intelligence. What started as a televised exchange had become a meditation on civility itself, because beneath the headlines and hashtags, a deeper question had emerged. When did discourse become theater? When did we start mistaking cleverness for wisdom or noise for conviction? Jasmine's calm answer reminded everyone that progress isn't built on who talks louder. It's built on who listens deeper. Her composure stood as quiet defiance against a culture that rewards reaction over reflection. She didn't out-talk her opponent. She outlasted the performance. She replaced spectacle with sincerity, and the audience, weary of sound bites, finally exhaled. By the week's end, think pieces called her moment. A reset, editorials declared it a turning point for American dialogue. It wasn't about left or right, celebrity or politician. It was about tone, empathy, and truth reclaiming space in the conversation. And somewhere within that transformation, Freeman's silence became a metaphor for something far greater, the point where ego yields to understanding. It became a cinematic still frame for our time. A man known for his voice, quiet in reflection, and a woman known for her resilience, calm in conviction, because that's where real strength lives. Not in dominance, but in restraint, not in volume, but in vision. As the final replay faded from screens, one truth resonated in the hearts of millions who had watched, shared, and reflected integrity. Outlasts charisma, principles, outshine performance, and truth when spoken with calm certainty has no equal, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the sound of truth being heard. The replay begins one last time, that defining instant, when Jasmine Crockett delivers the line that silences the room. The camera captures it in slow motion, her steady gaze, her calm tone, her truth landing heavier than any insult could. And there it is, Morgan Freeman, speechless. A legend without words, that single moment became more than a viral clip. It became a statement, proof that calm intellect can disarm arrogance, that clarity can conquer condescension. In a world where shouting is mistaken for strength, Jasmine reminded everyone that real power doesn't roar. It resonates. Her poise wasn't just performance, it was principle, the kind forged through experience, empathy, and conviction. She showed that confidence isn't about overpowering someone, it's about outlasting the noise as the screen fades to black. Her words echo like a quiet anthem for a louder world. Truth doesn't tremble. And maybe that's the challenge left for all of us to meet. Arrogance with grace, chaos with composure, hate with higher ground. Because if one calm voice can silence a room, imagine what a generation of them could do. Share this if you believe real power is calm, reasoned, and rooted in truth. Let the world remember that silence isn't the absence of speech, but the victory of integrity. Fade out the sound of applause, replaced by reflection. Pride lingers not for who spoke louder, but for who spoke last. And